Well, hello, everybody. The people on the screen that you're looking at are people that talk at least once a week about witnessing, about migrant rights, about witnessing at the border specifically. Um, we get together because we haven't been able to look away from the issue that grabbed us. Some of us were grabbed many years ago, some of us a few years ago. And we started out looking at issues having to do with the border and with migrant rights. And along the way, we just attached to each other. We know we're not the only ones. There are probably people listening who also are doing the same thing, and I hope that we all can find good friends to share our reflections, our thoughts, and our activities with, because it's really hard to do this alone. We're in a kind of a weird state, aren't we, in this country, with COVID scaring us to death, and an apparent rise in a right-wing party that threatens to turn our state into something even worse than we imagined when we started doing this a few years ago. It makes it hard for us to think about anything but the kind of apocalypse that's coming at us from all directions. But we've determined, I guess, all of us for our own reasons or for shared reasons, we've determined that we still want to use our eyes, use witnessing to focus on issues having to do with the people that are being driven out of their home countries and are making their way to our border. A few years ago, starting to think about these issues because there was a guy named Trump in office who was really loud about it. I started paying attention to this issue and went down to the border and ended up, kind of finding myself at Tornillo, which was a children's detention facility where children were being held for a really long time, as part of Trump's policy of disincentivizing migration. Disincentivizing migration is not a policy that he invented. He just was noisier about it. We've been doing that for a long time. We've been trying to keep people from coming into the country because we think that those people are going to take something away from us. And we also know that, I guess, we as a population are being used by the right wing to make us fearful, to make us worry about things that might happen to us if these people cross the border. These people are, generally speaking, people with darker skin, and humans fear the foreigner, and they fear the strange. And anyway, ended up down at Tornillo. I fooled the county of El Paso County into thinking that I was a film crew, and I parked an RV outside the gates of Tornillo, which is also a port of entry. And a bunch of people started showing up. Some of them are here. You're looking at them. And what happened? Well, we were there for a few months. And eventually enough people came, and particularly, I guess I'd have to say, a bunch of Democrats showed up. They, members of Congress, they came and they started making noise, and they talked about how terrible it was. And we got Tornillo closed. The enemy was Trump and his administration. We went to Homestead in Florida, another child's prison, and we spent a lot of time outside of there. And I know there are people watching who definitely spent a lot of time at Homestead, looking over the fence, seeing what we saw. And we managed to attract, due to luck and also some incredible skill by people who were bird dogging, they called it, bird dogging candidates, and making them promise that they would show up down there at Homestead. And in fact, we played back the tapes to them and made them do it. And they came and they looked over the fence, and it included a bunch of Democratic candidates, including Kamala Harris, who was running at that time, who looked over there and said, this can never happen again, and we're going to end it. And it got enough publicity to close it. We were pretty encouraged by this. We were able to focus on a narrow part of the bigger, much bigger problem, which in the process of doing this, we've all learned about. It's hard to imagine now how narrowly we focused and how broad we now know the subject is, and how big an issue it is, how monstrous it is, how it's tied to everything we think about every day, our own lives and the lives of all the people in the world who are in the process of getting displaced and shaken up and made miserable. So Homestead closed too, and we decided that we would go to the border to address this policy called NPP, remain in Mexico, and let's see, I guess it was Julie and Carla and Melissa, my wife, and me. We piled in a car and we started going to different spots along the border and tried to find a spot where we thought we might be comfortable. And we ended up in Brownsville, Texas, a place that, there's good reason to feel comfortable. There were friendly people there. But across the bridge, there was a big encampment of people who were being sent back to Mexico to wait interminably for their chance at asylum. And we had Democrats come there too. They showed up. What's the name? Jill Biden walked over there and said, this cannot be. And Joe Biden was running for president, and he said that, as soon as he got into office, he was going to end this on day one. He didn't say he was going to end something called Title 42, which is expelling more people than ever before. He didn't say that he wasn't going to load up airplanes and fly thousands and thousands and thousands of people back to Haiti, where they have nothing, where they can't live, where they fled. The Democrats won the presidency. They won the Congress. And now we know, if we didn't know before, that it's not a Republican policy. Disincentivizing migration into our country is not Republican. It's not. It's basically the policy of our country is to keep people out. Why this is the case? We know that it's the great advantage of right-wing movements around the world to vilify migrants, to make it seem as though the problems that we're all suffering, including COVID, for God's sake, are all the results of strange people coming across our borders. COVID scared us away from Brownsville, and the people that you see on the screen, a lot of them have managed to find ways to keep watching. We have decided that, well, I don't know if we've decided. It's very hard to look away once you've seen this. It's hard to forget the faces. It's hard to forget the people. It's hard to forget the plight that these people are facing. It's hard to stop. And so we watch from, in as safe a way as we possibly can from a distance. We haven't just been in our living rooms. We've been down to Fort Bliss, the largest military base in the country, where they still have a bunch of kids stashed away. We started watching flights, which happened, I think, at first in Brownsville, and I'm hoping that Carla and Tom will tell us a lot about that, because we as a group, they as individuals are instrumental in looking and seeing what's going on with ICE Air and the deportations that are going on. They don't call them deportations, a lot of them. They call them Title 42 flights, which is, For those who don't know, I'm sure most of you do know, but Title 42 just says that, these people are going to make us sick. Here we are in like the COVID capital of the world here, and we're worried about other people coming across the border and making us sick. Well, we're sick, all right, and but that's not what's causing it. That's where Witness at the Border comes from. And I want to kind of transition now to what Witness at the Border is doing with a little bit of a run-up. So if we can start with the question of the flights, which, Witness at the Border, thanks to the work of Tom Cartwright principally, but also Carla, is the source of information about these flights. The world relies on the reports that come out of from them. When I wake up in the morning, the first thing I do is I go on Twitter and I retweet what Tom has just tweeted, which is a description of the flights that are scheduled to take place. And he follows up throughout the day and tells us which ones happened and which ones didn't. So Carla, why don't you give us a run up to how we started looking at flights, and then Tom, maybe tell us a little bit about flights.
Okay. Early in our time in Brownsville, I heard from a woman named Debbie Nathan. Debbie might even be with us today, I'm not sure. And she kept encouraging us to go look for the deportation flights at Brownsville Airport. The history of these flights, they were started under the Clinton administration. They weren't new, but they were definitely continuing and were very busy under the Trump administration. And we were sort of thrashing around trying to figure out when the flights went, when we should go to the airport, when we happened to get a call from a friend of mine who was sitting on a plane at the Brownsville airport leaving. And she said, one of those flights that you just told me about I see them on the runway. And we had just stopped our witnessing for the day, and Josh and I jumped in the van and drove out to the airport and saw our first deportation flight and learned how to use the online tracking system called Flight Aware, and poked around, and we incorporated in-person flight witnessing while we were on the ground in Brownsville. And then once we had to leave because of COVID, we continued to virtually watch those flights and learn more about the patterns of the flights, where they went, how often they went. And one of the advantages to doing that at the time we did it was there weren't a lot of planes in the air early COVID. Most of the planes were grounded. So it was pretty easy for us to figure out which planes in the air were deportation flights. And we were able to learn a lot in those early days that carries through to the witnessing today. It would be a lot harder to pick out. It's still a little bit of a pick out, and Tom will talk about how we identify those flights today. But I think without that early COVID, where the skies were relatively empty, and it was very easy for us to see and pick out which flights were deportation flights, we were able to gain quite a bit of knowledge and see patterns and figure out, which cities they flew to every Tuesday. And yeah, so that's kind of the very quick history of how we got into the business of tracking deportation flights. And as we tracked more and more and built more and more of a database and started doing more data analysis, and I think I'll pass it to Tom at this point to talk about where we are today and how many flights are going. And it has not slowed down, which he'll be able to share the numbers with you to show you that. You're muted, Tom.
Yeah. Thank you, Carla. Appreciate it. Yeah, so as Carla said, we continue to do that daily, and it hasn't really abated at all. In fact, it's become far more complex, because initially, as Carla noted, there weren't as many planes in the air. And so we knew that it was only primarily Swift Air and World Atlantic. And for a while, it was only Swift Air flying these flights for ICE Air. Over the last couple of months, there's actually been 6 different carriers. And the more carriers, the more planes you track. So on a daily basis now, probably tracking well over 100 planes, which would be well over 200 flight legs, of which you have to ferret out which ones, as Carla said, are the ICE flights, which are 20 to 40, depends on the day. Today, for example, there were 15 different planes in the air for ICE Air. I mean, that's the magnitude of what happens every day. And so, you know, based on the knowledge, a lot of it gained early on of where they fly and what planes fly, we're able to identify with a very high confidence level now which ones are ICE Air flights. And that's augmented by a lot of the networks of people that over time been able to develop from Haiti, where there are 3 people I talk to almost every day about what's happening there to get insights ahead of time sometimes, so I know what to anticipate. In Mexico, there's a variety of different people in and out of the government that I can speak with, although ICE Air discloses nothing about these flights. So everything that we have, everything that people rely on basically comes from this activity. And once we publish this, I publish it basically once a month and distribute it to probably 35 press contacts, immigration journalists, all of the ones you would see on Twitter. So all the national press and so forth. And then I answer lots of questions for them, some of which end up in stories, some of which don't. And sometimes they will feed me information. I'll occasionally get something from a journalist that says, "Hey, I've heard this might be starting. Have you heard anything? Can you let me know if you see it?" And then I know what to watch out for. We're also plugged in with a variety of different activists and advocacy groups that also tell us all along the border, "Hey, we're seeing this happen here." Like the lateral flights, for example. First time they started going from, you know, Brownsville to El Paso, it was like, oh, I wonder what's happening there. And so we could build a network there. So it's really both quantitative information and qualitative information that we kind of bring together to be able to tell a story. You know, it's more than just the numbers. And there's 2 parts to the story. One is the story of what's happening, and the other is the story of the people. Because it's very easy, and I know everybody here knows that, to get wrapped up into the numbers and planes and flights. But when you translate that into the people, and that was what's so valuable about the early witness of watching people get on those planes in 5-point shackles, is you really understand and know that every plane that goes is a flight of maybe 100 people who are fathers, mothers, sisters, brothers, children, babies, that came here for protection and came here for a life, a better life than what they had. And they're being summarily rejected and flown back in 5-point shackles to their home country. So it is something that is easy to lose sight of, and it's something that we cannot lose sight of. And to give you just a quick indication of magnitude, over these 2 years, we've logged almost 11,000 ICE Air flights, 11,000. And of those, 2,000 are removal flights. In other words, flights that have taken people to their home countries directly. The others are flights moving people around the United States. And, you know, we talk about the COVID pandemic. It's beginning to rage again in detention centers, yet we see nothing of these flights abating at all. And, you know, we talk about, you know, I know many of us, including me, I thought it'd be an easier year this year because with the new administration, we anticipated things would slow down. Well, in fact, they haven't. And in fact, in many ways, they've escalated and become more complex. So just to give you an idea, of that 11,000 flights over 2 years, almost 6,000 have been since the inauguration of President Biden. And of the 2,000 removal flights, over 1,000 or almost 1,000 have been under this administration. So people ask me what's changed, and my answer is very simple. It's business as usual. And it's something that we all hoped would be different. So I'll just pause there and turn it back to Josh, and then I'm sure we'll take Q&As or if anybody else has questions.
Yeah, you know, it really is true. It's gotten at least it's as bad or worse than it was before, and we find ourselves in a situation where we're learning that painful lesson that the policy of this country, this nation, is to keep people out. It's to turn this place into a gated community, and we struggle. We struggle now because we're also, you know, hamstrung somewhat. I'm so pleased and so proud, really, that Tom has been able to do this kind of observation while we're all, you know, hiding in our homes. But we're not alone, and what we're finding out, and it's just kind of an important reminder. What we're finding out is there are a lot of people that are keeping the pressure on. Now, it's not that we're doing much. You know, we're not getting a lot done, but we're alive, and staying alive throughout these very dark times is an effort that takes a community. Margaret really helps us by reminding us all the time about the different organizations that are working on this and how we interact with them, and making sure that we are interacting with other people who care about this as much as we do. Margaret, can you tell us about some of those things?
Sure. I was reminded that the way we got connected as Witness at the Border with so many other immigrant advocacy groups was because I organized a screening of the documentary film made about Josh, Witness at Tornillo, and it was screened 2 years ago this month, the very beginning of January, just before the anniversary of the vigil at Brownsville. And we screened the film in Brooklyn, and a woman came up to me afterwards and said she worked for Amnesty International, and was I in touch with the people in her office working on this issue? And she put me in touch with Charanya, and Charanya said, "Are you on the asylum working group? You know, phone calls?" I said, "No." And so then started connecting, and it's been great. You know, Tom it's a way for us to communicate with a much larger group and learn from people, you know, people at the border, like the Hope Border Institute that of course Camilo was affiliated with before, but we're also connected with a lot of these small border groups and the larger groups like Amnesty International and Human Rights First through phone calls. And so it's been a great way for us as a grassroots, all volunteer effort to connect with a lot of different people. And then the thing that happened this year, the beginning of this year, people came together and said, we need to really work together as a coalition. And so probably a lot of you have heard of the Welcome with Dignity campaign. And if you haven't looked at the website, welcomewithdignity.org, we're Witness at the Border is one of over 95 organizations in the campaign. And one of the things they're doing is producing small videos. You know, if you're in your community right now, you don't know what to do, but maybe you want to show information to you know, a group or whatever, I just suggest you check out the welcomewithdignity.org website to see some of the things that all these different organizations are doing and trying to do together to speak as a strong voice. Yeah.
Yeah, well, thank you, Margaret. That's great, and it's always good to have reminders all the time that it's not just a group of people who get together on 1 day a week and talk about these things, but that there's a whole network of people out there who are keeping this alive, keeping this cause alive, and that you're keeping us connected with it is very important. The other thing that we're connected with, and we need constant reminders about, is the world, and particularly the world that's outside of our borders. And we turn to Camilo a lot with questions about what's going on, because Camilo has been watching this for a lot longer than certainly I have, and has his fingers and his eyes on an awful lot of things that are going on out there in the world. So when we have our phone calls, there's no doubt that we're going to turn to Camilo and say, Camilo, tell us what's going on in Mexico. Tell us what's going on in South America. Tell us what's going on in Haiti. Tell us about it. So Camilo, tell us about it.
Yeah, I'm just so honored to be here and to think back of the road that brought us here, where we were 2 years ago, a year ago, where we are now, where we're going. I mean, I just feel so privileged to be part of this space, and also to have voices present that are listening to us as we speak, that are present here on this call, that reflect that world that we're trying to connect to. You know, when I see Olga Talamante, when I see Joe and Selena Keensecker, when I see Alessandra, I'm just picking some names that leap out to me because they are connected and grounded to that world that we seek to also ground ourselves in. I just feel so honored. I think the key thing is this, is that we've discovered that these policies don't have borders either, that structural racism doesn't have borders, and neocolonialism and the imperialist policies that come with it. All of the baggage that gives the center of gravity, let's say, to border and immigration policy. Concretely, it's the very now direct and open complicity and collaboration between the US government, US authorities, and Mexican authorities under AMLO that essentially make possible the extension of all of the worst features, all of the most regressive aspects of border and immigration policy. Everything that brought us to Tornillo, that brought us to Homestead, that brought us to follow these flights, to stand in vigil in Brownsville, everything is now being exported to Mexican territory and beyond. The US border is no longer the US border. It's Mexico's southern border with Guatemala, and successively down all the way to the border between Colombia and Panama, for example. And so recently we've been trying to do what we can to support the positioning of the issue of justice for Haitian migrants. But what we've come to understand is when we look at incidents like Del Rio, which mobilized and outraged and shocked the conscience of so many of us in this space, what we've found is that the origins of what happened at Del Rio, those images that we all saw of Haitian migrants being corralled by reins used as whips by Border Patrol agents on horseback, and everything that that evokes about history, we saw that that doesn't have borders either. And that ultimately, for example, it's the thousands of Haitians who've been held essentially captured in spaces like Tapachula near Mexico's southern border in Chiapas, or all the way up to Tijuana, that all of these images get, and all of these policies get reproduced. You know, it was just a year ago, there were two things. I mean, in addition to, you know, the other anniversaries that we have in mind, There was the massacre of 19 mostly Guatemalan indigenous migrants, Mayamam at Camargo in Tamaulipas, just 45 minutes from the border, in the shadows of the border. And they were massacred. They were killed by Mexican state police, trained and financed for the US, by the US as part of the drug war. That's who carried out that massacre, targeting migrants. And that's part of this broader pattern of persecution, of this war against migrants that many of us have begun to think of as essentially an ongoing migrant genocide. It's driven by US policy, but it cannot be carried out on the ground without Mexican government collaboration and that of the Guatemalan government, and so on. And all of those functions and all of those dimensions are being extended as we speak. And so when we stand for justice at the border, we stand for justice in each of those spaces as well. And so our solidarity with Haitian migrants is part of that broader struggle. And we will be seeking to try to bring those voices to the US through every means we can. That's our commitment, and that's what we're renewing tonight.
Thank you, Camilo. I feel so much more connected with something so much bigger. You know, I have to say that I started out pretty naive in my pursuit of this issue, showing up at a children's detention facility and thinking that somehow was the what was big, and it was to the kids that were there, certainly, and it was big, I suppose, to the people that came and managed to get the place shut down. But my God, the longer we, the bigger the scope, the bigger the wave that's coming at us, the bigger the danger that the world is in of sinking into a horrible scenario of hatred. One of the things that we do, some of us, maybe all of us in some way, we document what's going on and what we've done. And I write these little things in Facebook, and but Sarah Towell, who's somewhere, I don't know, she's off the screen at the moment. Maybe she'll come back. So yeah, here she is now. Is actually writing a book that's about to be published about some of the things that have gone on at the border that involved us, some that involve other people, all people that we know, however. And she's also put together podcasts, Witness Radio. And I want you to tell everybody about the book and about the podcasts and about anything you really want to talk about, Sarah.
Thank you, Josh. And I'm just so honored to be here and so honored to be a part of this group. My anniversary of meeting everyone here both in our among our attendees as well as ourselves is exactly 2 years ago yesterday. I went to the border like the rest of us, a lot of us, most of us, because of family separation. But it took me a couple of years to get there because I live abroad, I had family issues, I had health issues. But family separation, for me, ripped off the Band-Aid, opened the lid. I couldn't stop looking. And I finally made it to the border to see for myself what was going on. And I thought I would write about it, but I wasn't sure what. I was working on a novel at that point, and I needed a little break from the novel. So I took myself to Brownsville with the intention of driving along the border from Brownsville to El Paso, visiting 10 cities and shelters along the way. But I got to Brownsville, I went across to Matamoros, I couldn't leave. I got swept up in the TIA's mission, in Team Brownsville's mission, fell in love with GRM and the folks at RCM, that's right. And from there, I went into detention centers. I went into the kangaroo courts. I tried to get into child detention centers. In just a few short weeks, I realized that Trump exposed the ills for me, but they didn't start with him. They began around the time I was born, and they grew up all around me, hiding in plain sight. And I felt shame that I didn't know that all of this cruelty was going on in my name. And I resolved to write about that, to write about the fact that I didn't know, and I should have, and write for others like me who, if they knew, they would also care, and they would also be outraged. And then the real kind of turning point was when I met Lizzie Cavazos of the Angry Tias, and she asked me what I do, and I told her I'm a storyteller. And she said, oh, please, MPP hasn't just stopped people at the border, it's stopped their stories too, but more importantly, it's stopped our stories. Please tell people, everyone is, whomever you can, what we're up against down here and what we're doing every day. I can't stop and write the stories because I'm too busy helping the situation, pushing back against the cruelty, trying to see to the common good. I was just so moved by that I resolved right then and there to write a history about the failings, the many failings of deterrence by cruelty, but framed through the actions and the voices of those people, those groups and those individuals who are doing their best to push back against the evil. And the book is called The First Solution, which is a hat tip to Toni Morrison's famous 1995 essay called On Racism and Fascism, where she says, you can't get to a final solution without a first, without a second, without a third. And I believe that if you add up all the lives that are destroyed by all the tentacles of not just the US immigration system, but what is being replicated and duplicated and expanded all across the world. I live in London, I live in England, and right now in the House of Commons is a bill brought by Priti Patel, who is the UK's Stephen Miller, to do exactly here what's already being done in the US and Australia combined. In Europe as well, people are dying in the Mediterranean Sea, just as our migrants in the Americas are dying in the Darien Gap. They're parallel stories. We have to get to the bottom of it, or we are all doomed if we're not already. And so that's what I hope my book will expose. Like, how did we get here? It is going to be published. I'm happy to say I signed a contract just as 2021 came to a close, but it won't be published for another 2 years. The publisher wants it to be a part of the next presidential conversation. So in the meantime, because 2023 isn't soon enough, we resolved as a group, Witness at the Border, during the pandemic to continue to raise awareness and do education, grassroots education like this through webinars. And then that spun off into the Witness endorsed podcast, Witness Radio. So we've done 9 episodes and rounded off our first season. I hope you'll all come over and listen. I put the link in the chat and join up, become a patron if you are so moved to support the effort. Again, my mission is to educate people beyond our silo, and in particular, voters on the side that we want to win, because the immigration is only a voting issue for one side, and that's the mega crazies. So we have to make it a voting issue for the Democratic side as well, on the grounds that our human rights atrocities are adding up bit by bit, if not to mega crimes against humanity, then very possibly, as Camilo said, genocide. And thanks to Tom and Carla and their witness, we intersected with me observing flights, mass deportation flights to Africa, where I managed to uncover a unique form of torture that's being conducted by ICE agents with impunity and no oversight, which is now the subject of a complaint against ICE, and it's called the RAP complaint. Take a look. We're hoping to get the individuals who were flown on those planes back to the US under humanitarian parole. Cross your fingers, it's going to take years, but that's where we're going. Anything we can do to expose and elevate and make other people mad. I think one last comment, the outrage that was so easy to summon under Trump we don't see it anymore. I know people are tired of the pandemic. People are tired of the bad news. People are tired of climate change. Everybody's got something to worry about. But the atrocities, the human rights abuses, the crimes against humanity, they haven't stopped. And this is under a Democratic president. The issues know no political party. They cross party lines, but we have to make it important for the other party. So I've said too much. I'll stop there. Thank you, Josh.
Thanks, Sarah. No, you're right, but it's a really big issue, isn't it? When we had Trump in office, we had the Democrats coming and standing by our side like crazy. But now the Democrats are aware of what you just pointed out, which is that the only people who care about immigration, not the only people, because here we are and here are the people watching and here are those organizations, but most of the people that care about immigration is the right wing.
Mm-hmm.
And those Democrats are terrified of talking about immigration. They just won't even talk about it now. When Trump was in office, it was great to slam him and to use against him. But now they're just worried about it being used against themselves.
Yeah.
Action from the right, and we're in a bad situation, a really bad situation. I don't want to skip over anybody here, and so I'm going to I'm going to say this. On the upper right-hand corner of my screen, there's Lee, who is an attorney and also has a long history of working on gun control issues, and is vital to our organization here, and also is kind enough to do legal analysis for us when we need it. And there are a bunch of things going on in legal world that is hard for me to follow, and so I rely on him for analysis. He and Camilo sometimes go at it because Camilo also comes from that background, and both of them have to put up with the lawyer jokes that we make every time we consult them. So I'm not going to make any of those jokes now, but if anybody else can think of one, just go right ahead. They usually take it pretty well. The other thing I really want to make sure that I mention here is that, you know, everybody hates Facebook, especially Margaret. Everybody hates Facebook, right. And I hate Facebook. I think we all hate Facebook, but on Facebook, there are thousands of people potentially, and we don't know exactly how it works because we know that thousands of people aren't looking at everything we do, but thousands of people potentially can see what it is that we write, what we post, and what we think is important for them to read. And maintaining a Facebook group page takes work. There are all kinds of, believe it or not, there are all kinds of people with bad motives out there who do things that we have to address. People who jump into our group and say nasty things and get people very excited and hurt our feelings, really, because I guess that's one of the main things Facebook is for, is hurting onto people's feelings. But we don't use it that way. We use it as a way to get it out there. Julie and Carla watch the Facebook page. They take care of that. They make sure that nothing gets out of control. And they have to, of course, read Facebook, which of course is a punishment enough.
I wonder if Julie can tell us what, you know, anything about what's happening with the Facebook group now.
it's been rather quiet. We don't see the posts that we used to see from people. It'd be great to have people participating again. I think we have like 18.2 thousand members. Some of those have come in since Facebook changed policy, where we could approve a member before they joined. Now they can just join, but we can get a bead on them pretty quick and kick them out if they don't behave. But it just rocks along.
It rocks along, and it gives me a place to keep saying whatever it is that I think of to say. And like I said, we don't know exactly how many people read this. It's painful often to look at Facebook because all kinds of things jump in there that, and of course we have to know that we're being complicit with social media that's probably ruining the world. Nonetheless, we do it. We do it because we're willing to make that sacrifice. We look at it and we edit it and we follow it. I think we've talked a lot about what we've done. I know there are a lot of people that are listening that know all about what we've done. We've talked a bit about what we're doing now, but there's more that we're doing now. And one of the things is a statement that Camila woke us up late last week, telling us that we had to make a statement real quick to get word out there, to react to the fact that the Biden administration had walked away from discussions about reparations for people who had been separated. So Camila, why don't you tell us where that stands now, what we've been doing?
Sure. I think the key thing here is what we've referenced already in this exchange, which is the continuities between the policies that prevail now and those that prevailed before. And family separation is a crucial example. Not that the underlying policy of family separation continues, but its legacy persists. Concretely, what that means is over 5,000 children and families who were separated, continuing to fight for full compensation and reparations. There was an overall negotiation process to try and reach a kind of package settlement, let's say, of those claims, which are potentially very serious claims in federal court and in international courts, because we're talking about international crimes, ultimately. Family separation has to be understood as a human rights crime that included dimensions such as torture and forced disappearances. That's the standing, the magnitude of what we're talking about. Under US law, under international law, every injury has to have a remedy. You have the right to a remedy. And for crimes like these, the remedy is reparations. Not only has the Biden administration sadly walked away from the possibility, at least at this point, of an overall settlement, but it is actively litigating against these claims in several pending cases around the country. In California, in New York, in Pennsylvania, it's filed motions to dismiss or to transfer these cases. And in all of them, it's made essentially the same argument. We think these policies are wrong. The Biden administration has said, we think they're inhumane, we repudiate them, but those who were victims of these policies do not have the right to full reparations and compensation. And our position is that the administration cannot have it both ways. That the administration, the Biden administration now, has a continuing responsibility to respond to these claims, which are claims for fundamental justice. So we stand with the victims of family separation, and we insist that this right to full reparations and compensation be respected. So what we've tried to do now is fashion a statement, and we're very, very appreciative of all of the organizations, crucial organizations on the front line that have signed on in support of this statement. that we will be issuing as a way of commemorating Dr. Martin Luther King's holiday, MLK Day, on Monday, January 17th. And we ask you to join us in that effort. We'll be sharing the link for organizations to sign on, and we will be continuing to do whatever we can to stand in solidarity with the affected families. A very technical thing, but something that we should understand as part of all this is that when you have human rights crimes of this magnitude, of these dimensions, there's a continuing liability by whichever administration is in office. The change of administrations does not cut the sequence of liability. Liability is a continuing web. And so the Biden administration today is liable as a government before the courts, US courts and international courts, for what the Trump administration did. And in effect, sadly, the practical result of what the Biden administration is doing now is to defend what Trump did through family separation. What the Biden administration has said is that was a valid exercise of discretion about a policy choice. And our position is that family separation and these kinds of violations can never be a valid policy choice for any administration.
So Camillo, can I engage you as a fellow lawyer?
Sure.
And frame it this way. What you say is a liability of the administration or of the government, to me, is a reflection of the responsibility of every person in America who either was for or against this. And this, I think, is the difficulty that we had when we talked about German reparations after World War II. It's the difficulty we have when we talk about reparations for slavery, which probably no one here is too terribly closely connected to. But that is the continuing legacy, is the responsibility that we as a country, if we want to be thought of as a country, have for everything that's gone on previously. Or do you disagree?
Absolutely, completely agree.
How
That's
often does that
essentially,
happen?
yeah, that's the principle of reparations, and it's what's called around the world transitional justice. And the US has funded and supported transitional justice efforts around the world. Now what we need is a truth commission about crimes at the border, about crimes as part of immigration policy. And that's also part of our vision for this work moving forward.
And I might just jump in because Margaret pasted in the chat a link. DHS, Department of Homeland Security, has asked for comments on regulations that would hopefully prevent this from ever happening again. And so many folks are trying to get comments flooded into DHS because it's important to have as many as possible. So it's very easy. It doesn't have to be a long comment. And so just wanted you to alert you to the chat that Margaret was nice enough to, or the link Margaret was nice enough to drop in the chat.
Yeah.
In fact, families belong together make it so easy. They've pre-populated text. If you want to add to it, even better. But if that's certainly good enough to just take the text they've offered. It's really super easy.
Yeah.
Is that on their website? Familiesbelongtogether.org, I think.
Yeah.
Great.
Josh, I'm thinking that because our origins of this organization go back to child detention, that taking just a couple minutes to talk about what the current state of child detention is, how many kids are being detained, might be, I think there might be some questions about that. So
I really want to do that, Carla. I just want to make one comment before, and I was going to throw it over to you. I want to talk de facto family separation, which is something that Title 42 is doing by the fact we have a policy that accepts unaccompanied minors across the border. Those people that you're paying attention to, kids that are still populating places like Fort Bliss out of our sight. If you accept kids, but you don't accept adults, you get people who are desperate enough to break up their families. And that is a kind of a separation that goes on right now. One of the things that we learned from targeting a place like Tornillo and then at Homestead is that it actually seems to have an effect, because Tornillo and Homestead weren't reopened when we started, having a new flood of unaccompanied minors. They didn't reopen them because they actually said at some point, there was a statement that said Tornillo was too political. And we know that Homestead was too sensitive because Kamala Harris, who's now our vice president, stood up on a ladder next to me and said, this can never happen again. If we had enough people at enough camps, maybe they'd stop having these things altogether, and they would change policies so that they weren't separating children from their families, from adult members of their families at the border, before the border, by their policies. But there are interesting things going on for unaccompanied minors that I want you to tell us about. I also just want one more comment that just came to my mind, is that they picked places like Fort Bliss because we couldn't get close. So we did go down to Fort Bliss, and we did demonstrate there, and we did march there, and we did try and make noise there. Even in the midst of COVID, we did that. But we couldn't get close. And that's the thing that witnesses like us have to deal with. Is the fact is that they know that if we can get close enough to look and to tell the story of what we see inside, we can have an effect. So they buried it. They buried those kids in the biggest military base, bigger than the goddamn state of Rhode Island in Texas. But what's going on with unaccompanied minors now? Because if there's a place where there's a tiny bit of good news, I think it might be that. So tell us.
Hey,
Carla.
Josh, could I just say one quick thing
Sure.
before too, just to tag on, because I think a lot of people, hopefully everybody on this call probably understands what a family is in the definition. But a family in this definition is a parent or legal guardian. So if a child comes with an tia, comes with their grandparent, comes with their sibling, they are separated. That is not the legal definition of family that's used at the border. So just wanted to lay that out there because that's just one other little nuance that I think we need to understand when we talk about families. Thanks.
Right.
Sorry about that.
Oh, no,
Carla?
that's great. And Tom, please pipe in on the numbers on children, because you follow that closely as well. We started tracking the number of children being detained, both by Border Patrol and HHS on March 24th of this year. And at that time, there was 16,513 children being detained between the two types of facilities. Today, we're at almost half that. 8,304 children as of is what they're reporting, which is approximately the capacity that's available in what's referred to as permanent ORR facilities. So there are couple hundred permanent ORR facilities around the country where children, immigrant children, are detained. But when there's a large influx of children, that's when these, what they're calling emergency intake shelters, are set up. And at the peak, which was on April 28th, there were over 23,000 children in detention, being detained by HHS around the country. And there were 13 of these emergency intake shelters open at the time. So there is a sliver of good news in that those numbers are way down. A lot of children have been reunited with family. The challenge is that anecdotally, a lot of the children that are left in detention are harder to place with sponsors, either because they can't prove a family relationship with a sponsor, or because they simply don't have somebody to sponsor them. They categorize children as category 1, 2, 3s, and 4s, with category 1 being having a parent, category 2 is other family relationships, 3 is friends or more distant family relationships, and 4 is no sponsor. So the children that are harder to place spend more time in detention, and a higher percentage of the children in detention now are the category 3 and 4. I do some work with an organization called Vicina, as a way to inform my own witnessing and be more knowledgeable about what's happening with sponsors and children. And most of the cases that I'm getting from Vicina, we help the sponsors complete the paperwork to get children out of detention. And most of the cases that I'm seeing now through Vicina are category 3, sometimes even category 4, whereas 4 months ago, the vast majority were category 1s and 2s. So we estimate that the number of children that are being held in these emergency intake shelters is probably under 500 at this point. We don't have exact numbers on each facility, but from what we know, I think it's a reasonable estimate that it's less than 500 that are in the temporary shelters, and that the rest of the children are in the permanent ORR facilities. And Tom, I don't know, I think the other thing that's key to mention right now is that the new apprehensions at the border right now are averaging about 75 children a day, which is low. And we think that's seasonal. We think we'll see that number uptick again when the weather's not as cold, and now that we're past the holiday season. And so we might see the numbers increase in some of these temporary intake shelters with the populations may grow there again. And Tom, you may want to add on some comments about children.
Yeah, I'll just mention on one of the worries I have, it's not really any fact-based or anything, is that people are waiting because of Remain in Mexico to some extent. And maybe there's a lot of, I think, misinformation, and people don't understand on the other side of the border in Mexico that you can't, quote, enroll in Remain in Mexico, which at least gets you a court date. And so I think there's a lot of people that believe that once that goes in everywhere, that they can, quote, enroll in it, which is totally not true. And in fact, there have been since it went in place in El Paso, 3 weeks ago, there's 260 people enrolled in Remain in Mexico. And during that same time period, there's probably been 70,000 people expelled under Title 42. So the default position is first expel under Title 42. There are certain people that can't be expelled under Title 42 because of nationality. And, Nicaragua, Brazilians, Cubans, a few others. Those are the only people so far that have been placed into Remain in Mexico. So I do have a worry people may be waiting and thinking that, that will be their time. So we'll have to wait and see. But it's very curious how it dropped, right, Carla? I mean, it was just like right before Christmas,
Right.
It just really dropped.
Yeah, Tom, just could you tell us, why is it that those countries, you can't expel to those countries? What's the reason?
Well, first of all, in Nicaragua, it's mixed, but in Nicaragua, the country itself of Nicaragua very much restricts how many people they'll take back. Basically 2 flights a month, which is about 250 people, which is virtually nothing. Cuba, we don't have diplomatic relations with, same with Venezuela. And Ecuador, similar situation, although some people do go back to Ecuador. But now most countries will take people back under Title 42, Brazil, Ecuador, Haiti, Guatemala, and El Salvador, Honduras, Haiti.
Thank you. Just to stay on Title 42 for a second. In the early days of the Biden administration, the administration was dropping hints all over the place that it was going to end Title 42, kind of leaking it out here and there. But I think those of us watching it got the feeling that the reason they kept pulling it back, one thing was since the excuse was COVID, and COVID was getting worse, and we had the Delta wave, and now we have the Omicron wave. So they were using that as an excuse, but also I think that the Biden administration got this sense that of its vulnerability on this issue, and realized that if they suspended that they'd be attacked on the right and fairly successfully. I mean, one of the things that we're seeing is that vulnerability of the administration. They don't seem to want to take the assertive step of changing policy or doing anything to encourage or feed the right wing. So we're in that weird situation. We often have people, we have people on the right that say, hey, the border's wide open. And the administration is letting all these terrible people into the country. And they come to us with that, and we say, yeah, I wish the border was wide open, because after all, there's a labor shortage, and after all, the people that come in are less likely to be criminals than the people that we already live among us. These are good people who have to leave their own countries, who are fleeing, and it would be nice if they could cross the border without this happening. But what we have is an administration that makes it a very, very low priority. And that's the situation we find ourselves in. It's a terrible situation where I've seen people on our side of the issue say, oh, no, we're not, the border's not open, because we don't want to get those people mad. So I find myself in a kind of a quandary about how to deal with this. I believe that we really should have open borders, but a lot of people feel differently, and sometimes that position can excite people even on our side of the issue, and they say they wouldn't want to see that. We're not exactly sure why, and we've had this discussion a million times. But we have the job of somehow convincing people to be sympathetic to the plight of migrants, to realize that there's a right to migrate, and to treat people with dignity, to welcome them with dignity. But we also have to kind of just move the line a little bit and convince people. And I don't know exactly how to do that. I think that's one of the things that we wonder about. Like, what are the positions that we can take? We know how to be right. The question is how to be effective. And I don't know how to do that. And it's one of the things that we talk about in our phone calls and struggle with. And I don't know. I just wanted to let people know that we don't know what to do about that.
Oh yeah, we do. Yeah,
we do.
And you know better than anyone does, Josh. The way you do it is you reach people in their hearts. And you've spoken, and I've talked to people. We come back and we tell them where we've been and what we've seen, and they're falling all over themselves to show their appreciation. And people are touched by what's going on. And I'm going to say that we tend to get real discouraged in this work. It really seems awfully tough, particularly since we can't be doing what we want to do. But the flip side of saying that the current administration is shying away is to say, yeah, because they're so sensitive to public opinion. They are really concerned, I think, much more than the previous administration, which is to say, whatever it is we're able to do has real potential to have real impact.
I had something I wanted to say. Next week is the 1-year anniversary of the inauguration, right? And I was on a phone call today with the Welcome with Dignity communications group. So they said, well, what should we do? So they're sending out a press release on Tuesday, which I think is the 18th, so that reporters who want to write on, how's Biden doing 1 year since the inauguration, the Welcome with Dignity group is going to send out a press release with quotes from probably 20 organizations. I'm going to ask one of you guys, maybe Tom, to write a good quote from Witness at the Border about what we think he's done over the last year. And I just wanted to say that anyone who's on tonight, if you have connections with reporters or newspapers or any kind of media in your hometown, go to welcomewithdignity.org or write me, and I'll send you the press release, because the more we get these stories out, the better.
Sounds great. I hope that everybody sees that that often I get to a point where I feel frustrated and despairing, and you might see also what happens. What happens is I have this group of people who bolster me up and tell me that I shouldn't give up, and that that we're doing the right thing, and that we have to hang in there. And it's a great comfort. It reminds me of one of our dear friends of Witness at the Border is Martina Espada, who recently won the National Book Award for Poetry. We didn't know that. We still liked him before that happened, and we had a webinar that he participated in, where we had basically art reactions to the issue of migration and stuff like that. Melissa had a painting, and Martine read his poem "Floaters." It was very moving, and Camilo asked him. He said, "Well, what do you do with a cause like this, with the kind of sadness that we have to put up with looking at such horror day in and day out, which is what we do. Let's face it." And he said, "Well, we have La Lucha, and it's what we're in together here. It's what we do together. We have each other, and that's not just the people that are on the screen, but the people that are behind the screen." I haven't been able to look at the list of names because I'm busy talking too much, but I know that I know a lot of you, and I'm glad we have each other. I just wanted to say that because it's going to be a long one.
Yep, gotta have the long view. Justice bend. What is the expression? Bend toward justice.
The arc of history bends.
Yeah.
Is long, but it bends toward justice.
The arc
Yeah.
of the moral universe.
That's it.
There we go.
The arc of the moral universe.
Yeah.
It's hard enough for me to remember that there is a moral universe, but I'm glad to hear that if there is one, it bends in the right direction.
But the lesson is we have to bend it. And that's what this is about.